Hello, my name is Celeste. I am 68 years old, and what happened to me still feels unreal when I say it out loud. I walked into a lavish party hosted for my daughter-in-law's family without knowing that I had quietly inherited the very company paying for every crystal glass and shining chandelier in that room. I was tired, carrying the faint smell of my little dog on my coat, when my daughter-in-law looked me up and down and coldly denied me a seat. She sneered, "You don't belong here. No one wants to sit next to someone who smells like a filthy dog." Her entire family laughed openly, not even trying to hide their delight in my humiliation. I felt my face burn, my hands tremble, but I said nothing. I simply turned around and walked away, swallowing years of learned silence. Moments later, everything changed. During the toast, the room hushed as the CEO stepped forward and asked me to come to the stage. Confused murmurs filled the air as he announced my name and revealed that I was, in fact, the new owner of the company hosting the party. I watched their laughter collapse into frozen smiles and pale faces, horror replacing arrogance in seconds. But that was only the surface of the story. There was betrayal before that night, pain behind my silence, and a strength I didn't know I still had. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you're from. Now let's understand how this story really began. I remember the smell first. Polished wood, expensive perfume, and something sharp in the air, like judgment dressed up as champagne. The ballroom in Boston glittered the way places do when they're designed to impress people who already believe they belong. Crystal chandeliers caught the light and fractured it into 1,000 sharp reflections. Everyone looked as if they had stepped out of a magazine's spread-tailored suits, silk dresses, confident laughter that rose too loud, too practiced. I stood just inside the entrance, my modest Sunday coat suddenly feeling heavier than it ever had. My fingers tightened around Mel's leash. She sensed it immediately. She always did. Her little body leaned gently against my ankle, warm and solid, her soft snort grounding me in a way no room ever could. "It's all right," I whispered, more for myself than for her. She looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes and gave my hand a quick lick, as if sealing a promise between us. David had told me I could bring her. He knew about her separation anxiety. He knew she panicked when I was gone too long. He'd promised. I'd believed him because he was my son, and believing him had always come naturally to me. I scanned the room, searching for a familiar face, and that's when I saw Jessica. She was radiant in a pale blue gown, her arm looped possessively through David's. She didn't smile when she saw me. Her eyes flicked first to my coat, then down to Mel, and something hardened behind her gaze. She stepped toward me with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. "You're surfer," she said, drawing out the word as if it tasted unpleasant. "Yes," I replied softly. David said. She cut me off with a quick laugh, sharp and dismissive. People nearby turned their heads, curious. "You can't sit with us," she said plainly. Then louder, so others could hear, "You don't belong here. No one wants to sit next to someone who smells like a filthy dog." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were new, I had lived a lifetime of quiet dismissals, but because of how easily they were delivered. Her family laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly. They laughed as if cruelty were a form of entertainment, as if humiliation were part of the evening's program. I felt something tighten in my chest, a familiar ache, the old instinct to apologize for existing. David didn't say a word. He didn't meet my eyes. Mel whimpered softly, sensing the shift in me. I bent down, stroked her velvet ears, and inhaled slowly. I tasted iron at the back of my throat, but forced myself to smile. "I understand," I said. My voice surprised even me with its steadiness. I nodded once, politely, as if accepting a minor inconvenience instead of a public dismissal of my dignity. I turned and walked toward the back of the room, toward the catering staff and the stainless steel counters, where no one expected me to shine. Each step felt measured, deliberate. I refused to rush. I refused to shrink. Behind me, laughter resumed. Glasses clinked. Life went on. Mel trotted beside me, her nails clicking softly against the marble floor. She glanced up every few steps, checking on me, protecting me in her own quiet way. When the music softened and the lights dimmed for the toast, I stood near a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres, invisible and oddly calm. That was when a man's voice carried across the room. "Excuse me, Miss Celeste?" The room hushed. I turned slowly. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood at the front, holding a microphone. I recognized him instantly. Mr. Henderson. My brother's name echoed in my mind, unbidden. My heart began to pound. "Yes," I answered. He smiled, professional and composed. "Would you please join us on stage?" A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. I felt eyes on my back, sharp and curious now. I glanced once at Mel. She wagged her tail, blissfully unaware of status or power, and that simple loyalty steadied me. I walked forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Henderson announced, his voice carrying effortlessly, "it is my honor to introduce the sole beneficiary of the late Samuel Whitmore's trust. Effective immediately, Miss Celeste Whitmore is the new owner of Sterling Logistics." Silence fell like a dropped glass. I saw Jessica's face strain of color. Her smile froze, brittle and unreal. David finally looked at me, then really looked, and I saw something ugly flicker behind his eyes. Not surprise. Calculation. I stepped up beside Mr. Henderson, my hands calm, my heart loud. When he passed me the microphone, I took it without hesitation. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said gently. Then I looked straight at Jessica. But before we continue, I added, my voice steady, "There seem to be some guests here who don't meet our company's standards for kindness." Mel sat at my feet, perfectly still. And for the first time that night, I felt taller than the room itself. The room didn't erupt after the announcement. It didn't explode into outrage or applause the way movies pretend moments like that do. Instead, it fractured into whispers, sharp, hurried, embarrassed whispers that slid along the walls like drafts. People avoided my eyes now. Some smiled too widely, too late. Others suddenly remembered urgent conversations elsewhere. David approached me as I stepped down from the stage. His face had rearranged itself into something soft, something almost familiar. "Mom, I swear, I didn't know," he said quickly, his voice low, urgent. "I had no idea about Uncle Samuel's will. You have to believe me." I looked at him, really looked, at the fine suit I had helped him buy, at the watch I had given him for his birthday when money was already tight for me. His eyes weren't filled with relief or pride. They weren't even filled with shame. They were measuring. "It's a lot to process," I said gently, "for all of us." Jessica didn't come closer. She stood frozen a few steps behind him, lips pressed thin, her gaze darting between me and the guests, still pretending not to stare. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften. She simply watched, calculating angles that no longer existed. I excused myself soon after. There was nothing left for me there. The chandeliers felt harsher now, the laughter hollow. Mel trotted beside me as we left, her tail wagging, unaware she had just walked through the center of a storm. The drive home was quiet. The city lights blurred past the windshield, and with every mile, the tension in my shoulders loosened just enough for exhaustion to seep in. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from release. My cottage greeted me the way it always did, warm porch light, familiar creak of the front step, the faint scent of lavender from the sachet I kept by the door. The moment I unhooked Mel's leash, she launched herself onto the sofa with a triumphant snort, spinning twice before collapsing into her favorite corner. I smiled despite myself. I put the kettle on and leaned against the counter, staring at nothing as it began to heat. My hands shook as I chose a tea bag. Chamomile. Always chamomile when I needed calm. I wrapped my fingers around the mug once it was filled, breathing in the steam, letting it fog my glasses and my thoughts. This was my life. This small kitchen, this quiet, and I had never resented it. I thought of all the times I had helped David and Jessica. Rent checks slipped discreetly into envelopes. Babysitting canceled plans. Bills paid with money I'd meant to save for myself. I never kept score. I told myself that love wasn't transactional, that family meant showing up even when it wasn't convenient. A memory surfaced uninvited, sharp, and vivid. Years ago, Jessica had called me in tears, claiming her car had broken down. An emergency, she said. She needed help, just this once. I remembered opening my jewelry box that night, fingers brushing against gold I'd worn to anniversaries and weddings, to moments when life still felt predictable. I sold it the next day. Every piece. The following week, she showed up carrying a designer bag, laughing about a great deal she'd found. I forgave her then. I told myself I must have misunderstood. The kettle clicked off. I sat at the small kitchen table, Mel's head resting on my foot, anchoring me to the present. Forgiveness had always come easily to me. Tonight, it did not. Morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled across the porch as I stepped outside to collect the mail. Mel padding behind me, nose already investigating the bushes. Bills. A flyer. Then an envelope that felt heavier than the rest. Legal letterhead. My heart slowed as I opened it, each word settling like a deliberate blow. They were contesting the will, claiming I was mentally unfit, that my age impaired my judgment, that my attachment to my dog bordered on obsession. I sat down on the porch step, the paper trembling in my hands. Not just greedy, cruel. Mel nudged my knee, sensing the shift. I buried my fingers in her soft ears, feeling their familiar warmth, their steadiness. My voice came out low, calm, and certain. "They think I'm a helpless old woman, Mel," I whispered. "They have no idea who they just declared war on." I met Mr. Henderson 2 days later in a quiet conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The windows overlooked the city, all glass and ambition, but I kept my eyes on my hands folded neatly in my lap. He spoke carefully, respectfully, the way people do when they think they're dealing with fragility. "I want to make sure you're comfortable," he said. "This transition can be overwhelming." "That's precisely why I wanted to speak with you privately," I replied. I lifted my eyes then and held his gaze. "I don't want my ownership emphasized right now. Publicly, I'd prefer it remain ambiguous, interim, at least until the lawsuit settles." He hesitated. "May I ask why?" "Because I needed to know how sharp the knife really was." But I didn't say that. "I need to see who reaches for power when they think it's within reach," I said instead. "And how far they're willing to go." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. He nodded slowly. "As you wish. Discretion can be arranged." On the way home, I rehearsed my next steps like lines in a play. Not because I enjoyed deception, but because survival sometimes demands performance. I invited David and Jessica to dinner that evening, calling it a peace offering. My voice on the phone was soft, uncertain. I let it tremble just enough. "Maybe we should talk," I told them. I think you might be right. Maybe all of this is too much for me." They arrived carrying a bottle of wine and carefully arranged sympathy. Jessica kissed my cheek as if it were a chore. David squeezed my hand a beat too long. I moved slowly that night. I let my shoulders sag. I misplaced words. I asked the same question twice. I watched their eyes light up, not with concern, but with relief. Confirmation. "Maybe you're right," I said as I served dinner. "Maybe this company is too much for me. I don't want to be a burden. Jessica reached across the table and patted my hand. Her smile was gentle, rehearsed. "We just want what's best for you." Mel lay quietly near my feet, her ears twitching. When I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I'd forgotten the tea, unclipped the small receiver from my pocket. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it through the walls. Mel wandered back into the dining room, tail wagging innocently. The baby monitor hidden in her collar was warm in my hand. At first there was only the clink of cutlery. Then Jessica's voice, low and sharp. "Once we declare her incompetent, we dump the dog at a shelter and sell the house," she said. "We need that liquidation money for the investment in the Cayman Islands." I closed my eyes. It wasn't the money that shattered me. It was the shelter. The casual way she said it. As if Mel were furniture. As if love were disposable. I pressed my fingers to my mouth, steadying my breath. A few moments later, Mel trotted back into the kitchen, tail high, trusting as ever. I knelt and held her close, my cheek against her warm fur. "You just saved us, girl," I thought, tears blurring my vision. Then the receiver crackled again. David's voice this time, hesitant, uneasy. "Does she know about the forged signature on Dad's life insurance yet?" The world tilted. And in that moment, something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. The words wouldn't leave me alone. Forged signature. They echoed in my mind long after the house had gone quiet again, long after Mel had curled against my leg and fallen asleep, her breathing slow and even. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks I had memorized over the years. And somewhere between memory and grief, something stirred. The insurance. I had been certain it had lapsed after my husband died. I remembered the exhaustion of that time paperwork, condolences, silence where laughter used to live. I remembered letting things slide because surviving felt like enough. But now, with David's voice ringing in my ears, the certainty wavered. At first light, I climbed into the attic. The air up there was thick with dust and history. Cardboard boxes were stacked like uneven gravestones, each one labeled in my own handwriting: taxes, photos, Christmas. I moved slowly, deliberately, my knees protesting as I knelt. Mel followed me up, sneezing dramatically every few minutes, then sitting to watch as if supervising my sanity. "I know," I murmured to her. "I don't like it either." Hours passed, measured by dust motes drifting through slanted sunlight. I found old letters, birthday cards, my husband's ties still faintly scented with his cologne. I pressed one briefly to my face before setting it aside. Then, at the bottom of a box I hadn't opened in years, I found it. The policy. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the yellowed papers. It hadn't lapsed. It was active long after his death. And according to the stamped records, it had been cashed out 5 years ago. I sat back on my heels, heart pounding. 5 years ago. I thought of what my life looked like then, of trusting hands, of open doors. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I drove across town to see Martha. She opened the door with a surprised smile that softened instantly when she saw my face. "Oh, Celeste," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like laundry soap and familiarity. "Come in." Martha had worked at the bank for decades. She knew systems. She knew people. Most importantly, she knew the shape of my handwriting, the steadiness of my habits. She spread the documents across her kitchen table, glasses perched low on her nose, lips pursed as she studied every line. The silence stretched, heavy and respectful. "It didn't lapse," she said finally. "It was withdrawn. All of it." I swallowed. "Is the signature?" She slid the paper toward me and tapped the line with one finger. "It's trying to be yours. But it isn't. Too heavy here. Too rushed there." The account number made my breath catch. Jessica's maiden name. Martha reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I'm so sorry." The apology cracked something open, but I held myself together until I left. I drove without music, windows down, letting the wind sting my eyes until I could tell myself the moisture was from that alone. I ended up at the park without really deciding to. I sat on a wooden bench worn smooth by decades of quiet lives passing through, the papers folded neatly in my bag like a verdict. Mel bounded across the grass, chasing a butterfly with joyful incompetence, her short legs pumping as if nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. I watched her and felt the ache finally bloom. I had raised David to tell the truth. I remembered correcting his homework, reminding him that honesty mattered even when it was uncomfortable. Where had that boy gone? Or had he simply learned that kindness could be bent, reshaped, used? My phone rang. "Mom," David said, his voice careful, rehearsed. "The court date is set for Tuesday. We really think you should just sign over power of attorney now to save yourself the stress." I closed my eyes, feeling the wood at the bench beneath my fingers, the warmth of the sun on my face. "I'll see you in court, honey," I said quietly. "Bring your best suit." The line went dead. Mel trotted back to me then, tail wagging, tongue lolling happily. I rested my hand on her head and breathed in. I wasn't done, not even close. The courtroom felt nothing like justice. It was too clean, too bright, stripped of warmth and humanity. Pale walls reflected the fluorescent lights overhead, and every sound, every cough, every shuffle of paper echoed as if the room itself were listening. I sat upright on the wooden bench, my hands folded calmly in my lap, Mel not allowed inside, her absence a small ache I carried quietly in my chest. Across the aisle, Jessica looked immaculate. Her tailored suit fit her perfectly, sharp lines and soft fabric designed to signal control. She met my gaze once and smiled, slow and confident, as if this were already over. David sat beside her, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. He still wouldn't look at me. That hurt more than I expected. Their lawyer spoke first. It presented their case with rehearsed concern, his voice smooth as he described my decline. Photographs appeared on a screen. Me on a park bench, leaning down to speak to Mel, smiling at her as she chased butterflies. The lawyer tilted his head sympathetically. "Talking to animals," he said, "can be an early indicator of cognitive confusion." I felt heat rise in my face, but I did not move. Next came receipts. Enlarged images of dog food purchases, high quality, yes, contrasted deliberately with photos of me wearing my old coat, my sensible shoes. The implication hung thick in the air. Neglect of self, misplaced priorities. They weren't accusing me of loving my dog. They were accusing me of choosing love over appearance. When it was our turn, Sarah stood. She was young, composed, her voice steady without being harsh. She didn't rush. She let the silence settle before she spoke. "My client is not confused," she said clearly. "She is generous. There is a difference." Something loosened in my chest at that. "She chose to spend her money on a living being who depends on her," Sarah continued. "She chose warmth over vanity, compassion over display. That is not incompetence. That is character." Jessica shifted in her seat. Then Sarah did something I hadn't even known to hope for. "We call Mrs. Gable to the stand." Jessica's head snapped up. Mrs. Gable walked slowly, deliberately, her posture straight despite her age. She held the oath with steady hands and met the courtroom with calm dignity. "I worked for Mrs. Jessica for 3 years, she said. Cleaning, cooking, listening. The judge nodded for her to continue. "I heard her practicing signatures," Mrs. Gable went on, "over and over. She laughed about it, said she was going to rob the old bat blind." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. "She said kindness makes people careless," Mrs. Gable added quietly. "She said that's how you take everything." I felt something cold and clear settle inside me. Jessica's face drained of color. Her confidence shattered, replaced by something raw and panicked. The judge's expression hardened, his gaze fixed on the defense table with unmistakable severity. When he spoke, his voice was firm. "This court will recess to review these allegations of fraud. Not dismissal. Review. Accountability." As we exited the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with murmurs. Jessica brushed past me, her voice low and venomous. "You think you won?" she hissed. "You don't know about the loan sharks David owes. If we don't get that company money, they come for you." I met her eyes, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Jessica's words followed me home like a second shadow. "They come for you." I locked the door behind me and stood in the quiet of my cottage, my heart beat loud in my ears. Until that moment, I had believed, naively, perhaps, that this was a battle of dignity, of truth versus greed. But her warning peeled back another layer. This wasn't just about respect or inheritance anymore. It was about safety. I sat at the small kitchen table long after the tea had gone cold, replaying her voice, the certainty in it. Loan sharks, debt. David. My son had always been careless with money, impulsive in ways I'd once brushed off as youthful mistakes. But this was something else, something darker. I realized then that whatever hole he'd fallen into, it was far deeper than I had imagined, and he had dragged me to the edge of it. Fear knocked softly, then harder. I let it in just long enough to acknowledge it. Then I stood up. The next morning, I called Mr. Henderson. I didn't soften my voice. I didn't apologize for asking. "I need protection," I said simply. There was no hesitation on his end. Within hours, arrangements were made. Sterling Logistics had resources I had never wanted, never needed, until now. By evening, a quiet, professional guard was stationed outside my cottage. He nodded respectfully when he introduced himself, his presence unobtrusive but solid, like a locked door you don't have to test to know it will hold. For the first time in days, I slept. Not deeply, but enough. A few nights later, I was sitting in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading. Mel curled beside me, her breathing slow and content. The house was dark except for a single lamp. The world outside felt hushed, suspended. Then Mel stiffened. Her head snapped up. Her ears tilted toward the back of the house. A low growl vibrated in her chest, wrong, unfamiliar. She never growled like that. She barked at squirrels, at passing leaves, at nothing at all sometimes. But this was different. "Mel?" I whispered. She bolted toward the back door, barking furiously now. A sharp, urgent sound that cut through the silence. My heart leapt into my throat. I didn't turn on the lights. Some instinct, older than fear, told me not to. I moved slowly, carefully, keeping to the shadows as I approached the hallway. Through the thin curtain over the back window, I saw movement. A shape hunched close to the glass. Metal scraped softly against wood. Someone was trying to pry the window open. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but my mind was clear. I triggered the silent alarm, the one the security team had installed only days earlier. Mel stood between me and the door, barking, her small body rigid with purpose. Seconds stretched like minutes. Then headlights flared outside, voices, firm commands. The shadow froze. At the time I stepped onto the porch, wrapped in my coat, the intruder was already on his knees in the grass, hands behind his back, cuffs snapping closed with a final, terrible sound. I recognized the slope of his shoulders before I saw his face. "David?" The word tore out of me. He looked up then, and whatever was left of my denial shattered completely. His eyes were red-rimmed, wild, filled not with menace, but with desperation. Shame poured off him in waves. The guard glanced at me, uncertain. "Ma'am, he was attempting to break in." "I know," I said softly. Too softly. David's shoulders shook. "I wasn't going to hurt you," he sobbed. "I swear. I needed the will, the original. If I could destroy it, everything would stop. The night air felt suddenly thin. Why? I asked. My voice barely held together. Why would you do this? He broke, then fully, crying the way he had as a child when he scraped his knee and came running to me for comfort. Jessica made me do it, he said through tears. She said it was the only way. She said they'd kill me. I stood there watching my son in handcuffs on my lawn and felt grief settle into my bones. Not loud, not dramatic, but heavy and final. Mel pressed against my leg, warm and steady. And I understood at last that loving someone does not mean saving them from consequences. Sometimes it means surviving them. David's arrest rearranged the world in ways I hadn't anticipated. When the police car disappeared down the street, taking my son with it, the night felt impossibly quiet. The porch light hummed, leaves rustled. Life continued with an indifference that felt almost cruel. I stood there long after the engine sound faded, my arms wrapped around myself, Mel pressed against my calf like a promise she intended to keep. In the days that followed, I made a decision that surprised even me. I did not press charges. Not yet. I sat across from David in a small, sterile interview room, the kind designed to drain warmth from every conversation. He looked smaller there, stripped of bravado, stripped of Jessica's voice in his ear. His hands shook when he reached for the paper cup of water. "This is the only chance I'm giving you," I said quietly. "You tell me everything, every scheme, every lie, every place she hid money, and you do not protect her." He swallowed hard. "She's been stealing from her own company," he admitted, small amounts at first, then more. She thought no one would notice. She said she was smarter than them. Each word felt like another thread unraveling. I listened, without interrupting, without softening the truth for him. When he finished, I stood, rested my hand briefly over his trembling fingers, and left. If there was going to be an ending to this story, it would not be quiet. It would be deliberate. That was when the idea came to me. A reconciliation gala. The phrase alone tasted ironic, almost tender. I announced it as my official acceptance of the CEO role, a celebration, a gesture of forgiveness, a moment for family and company to move forward together. The press loved it. The employees looked relieved. Forgiveness is comforting when you believe it costs nothing. Behind the scenes, I planned carefully. Invitations were handwritten, the guest list was precise. Every detail mattered. I went shopping alone. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror of the boutique at first. The saleswoman draped the red gown over me, her eyes bright with professional approval. The fabric was rich, unapologetic, the kind of color that doesn't ask permission to be seen. "I'll take it," I said before doubt could speak. At home, I fastened a tiny red bow tie around Mel's collar. She sat patiently, tail wagging, completely unaware of symbolism or revenge. I laughed softly, the sound surprising me with its ease. "You look very distinguished," I told her. Later, standing before my bedroom mirror, I studied my reflection. I saw lines earned honestly. I saw eyes that had learned to watch carefully. I saw a woman who had spent 68 years being agreeable, accommodating, invisible by choice. Tonight, I would be powerful. I wrote Jessica's invitation myself. "No assistants, no lawyers, come alone. We need to discuss David's bail and your future." I sealed the envelope with steady hands. She would come. I knew she would. She still believed she could bend me, soften me, talk her way out of consequences the way she always had. She had no idea who else would be in the room. And for the first time in my life, that knowledge felt like freedom. The ballroom took my breath away, even though I had approved every detail myself. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over polished marble floors. Music drifted softly, something elegant and restrained. the kind meant to soothe egos and suggest harmony. Conversations floated upward in careful tones. This was power dressed as celebration, forgiveness wrapped in silk. I stood at the top of the staircase with Mel beside me. The red gown felt heavier than fabric, like armor I had finally learned how to wear. Mel's bow tie sat neatly at her throat, bright against her soft fur. She looked up at me once, her eyes calm and trusting, and I rested my hand briefly on her head. "We're ready," I whispered, more to myself than to her. When Jessica arrived, I felt it before I saw her. A subtle tightening in the room, a ripple of attention bending toward the entrance. She looked flawless, as always, her posture rigid with practiced confidence. But when her eyes found mine, something flickered in certainty, quickly masked by arrogance. She smiled up at me as I descended the stairs, her lips curving in a way that had once made me doubt myself. "Celeste," she said warmly, "this is all so generous of you." I returned her smile. "I'm glad you came." I didn't give her time to settle, to find allies or excuses. I touched her elbow lightly and leaned in, my voice gentle, conspiratorial. "David is waiting for you," I said, "in a private room. I thought it would be better. Discreet." Her breath hitched, just barely. Hope, fear, calculation, all of it crossed her face in a heartbeat. She nodded and followed me without question. The VIP room door closed softly behind us. David was not there. Instead, her boss stood near the far wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sarah was beside him, composed and alert. A projector screen glowed quietly, waiting. Jessica turned slowly, confusion sharpening into alarm. "What is this?" she demanded. "Where's David?" I stepped back, placing Mel behind me instinctively. My heart beat steadily now. Calm. Certain. "I wanted you to hear yourself," I said. I pressed a button. Her voice filled the room, unmistakable, cold, cruel. "Once we declare her incompetent, we dump the dog at a shelter." Jessica's face drained of color. The recording continued, each word stripping away the careful persona she had perfected. I watched her shoulders tense, her jaw clench, her eyes darting as if searching for a way out. Then I played the second recording. Her laughter echoed, brittle and mean. I poisoned the roses. I just wanted to see her cry. She deserved it. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Her boss cleared his throat. "Jessica," he said slowly, "based on the financial irregularities Mrs. Celeste's team uncovered in our accounts while investigating you." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "You're fired." For a moment she didn't move. Then she screamed, unfiltered rage tearing through the room. She lunged forward, not toward me, but toward Mel. "That stupid dog ruined everything." I moved without thinking. My hand closed around her wrist with strength I didn't know I still possessed. She gasped, shocked. Her momentum halted inches from Mel's small, steadfast body. "Touch my dog," I said quietly, my voice low and steady, "and you'll wish you were in jail." She stared at me then, really stared, and for the first time she saw me clearly. I released her wrist and stepped back, placing my hand on Mel's head. She leaned into me, unafraid. Around us, the illusion finally collapsed, and I stood there, unshaken, knowing that this was not revenge. This was truth. The morning Jessica fell, the city felt unusually quiet, as if Boston itself were holding its breath. I watched from a distance as the truth finally caught up with her numbers unraveling. Signatures traced, lies collapsing under their own weight. There was no drama in the end, no grand speech. Just the dull click of handcuffs and the hollow look in her eyes when she realized no charm could save her now. Fraud. Embezzlement. Words that sounded clinical, almost gentle, compared to the damage they had done. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired, and strangely relieved, like a room finally aired out after years of stale smoke. David's reckoning came differently. He didn't fight it. When he accepted the plea deal, his shoulders sagged with something close to gratitude. Rehab for the gambling, community service, accountability without annihilation. When he told me, his voice shook, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to make a joke out of his own ruin. "I want to learn how to live without running," he said quietly. I believed him not because I was certain, but because hope needs somewhere to land. Standing in front of the employees of Sterling Logistics was harder than any courtroom. Faces I recognized, others I didn't, all of them carrying questions they were afraid to ask. I told them the truth in a steady voice that surprised even me. I wouldn't run the company day to day. Power had never been what I wanted. But I promised them something better: intention, transparency, purpose. I told them the profits would fund animal shelters, places that took in the abandoned and refused to give up on them. Elderly support programs for those who had given everything and were too often forgotten. I watched shoulders relax. Some people cried. In that moment, the company stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like a second chance. Mel sat beside me afterward, her small body pressed against my leg, breathing slow and content. She had no idea what she had set in motion, how her instincts had saved me when my own judgment failed. Commissioning her portrait felt inadequate, but necessary. In the lobby, where ambition once loomed cold and sharp, her painted eyes now watch everyone who enters. Gentle, alert, unimpressed by titles. I run my fingers over the frame whenever I pass. "You're the reason," I whisper. She answers with a soft snort, tail thumping once, as if to say it was never a question. Visiting David at the halfway house stripped away whatever illusions I still had. He looked healthier, clearer. The shadows under his eyes had faded, replaced by something fragile but real. We sat outside, hands finding each other without ceremony. No promises, no rehearsed apologies. Just warmth and the quiet understanding that healing doesn't announce itself. It shows up slowly if you let it. "I'm scared," he admitted. I squeezed his hand. "Me too," I said, and somehow that was enough for the day. As I left the facility, the sun was low, turning the asphalt gold. I felt lighter, as if I'd finally set something down I'd been carrying for years. Then I saw the car in my mirror. Familiar, intentional. It followed until I stopped at the light. The window rolled down and Jessica's brother leaned out, his smile thin and practiced. "You think this is over?" he asked. "The family doesn't forget." I smiled, not out of arrogance, but clarity. I put on my sunglasses, feeling Mel shift in the passenger seat, steady as ever. I revved the engine of my new car, not to intimidate, but to remind myself that I was moving forward. Whatever came next, I wasn't afraid anymore. I had survived the fall, and this time, I was choosing how to rise. 6 months have a way of softening sharp edges. When I wake up now, the mornings don't feel like a battlefield. They feel earned. I'm in the garden with my hands deep in the soil, the earth cool and forgiving beneath my fingers. The roses are blooming again, full, unapologetic bursts of red and white that seem to exist purely because they can. I remember when I planted them, my hands shaking, my heart unsure if anything I touched would survive. Now they climb confidently along the trellis, petals open to the sun as if they never doubted themselves for a second. Mel is stretched out nearby, her small body completely relaxed, one ear folded, the other twitching occasionally at a distant sound. The sun warms her belly, and she lets out a soft, content sigh that still makes my chest tighten with affection. There was a time when I watched her constantly, afraid that if I looked away, everything would collapse again. Now, watching her sleep feels like a quiet affirmation that peace is real, that it can last. I didn't run from the threat Jessica's brother tried to make. Fear used to send me shrinking inward, apologizing for my own existence. This time I listened calmly, did my homework, and acted. I bought the building his business operated in. The papers were signed without drama, without revenge burning in my chest. I raised the rent to market value. Nothing illegal, nothing cruel, just firm. He moved to another state within weeks. When I heard, I didn't smile or celebrate. I simply exhaled, long and slow, like someone finally standing up straight after years bent over. In the afternoons, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, the steam curling into the air like a gentle reminder to slow down. I think about who I was before everything shattered and who I am now. I am still Celeste. I still bake cookies for the neighbors, wrapping them in wax paper and tying the string too tight. I still listen when people talk, even when they ramble, because being heard matters. I still help where I can, quietly, without announcements. But I no longer disappear to make others comfortable. I no longer confuse kindness with self-erasure. There is a line now, clear and steady, and I know where I stand. Sometimes the memories drift in without warning. The soft crackle of a baby monitor in the dark, the echo of shoes on a courtroom floor, the glittering cruelty of a gala where I once felt so small I could barely breathe. I let those memories pass through me instead of burying them. They no longer own me. They are chapters, not conclusions. A young woman walks by the house one afternoon, slowing when she sees Mel. "She's cute," she says, her voice bright with uncomplicated joy. "Is she friendly?" Mel lifts her head, eyes alert but calm, tail giving a single dignified wag. I smile, feeling the weight of the past and the lightness of the present exist side by side inside me. "Oh yes," I say, winking. "She's a sweetheart, for she has a very low tolerance for nonsense." I pause, amused by my own honesty. "And so do I." The woman laughs, waves, and continues down the street. I reach for Mel's leash, then stop. Instead, I unclasp it and let it fall loosely into my hand. She looks up at me, trusting, ready. Together we walk into the house, no rush, no fear, two queens of our own castle. The door closes softly behind us, not as a barrier, but as a choice. Inside there is warmth, safety, and the quiet certainty that we have already survived the worst. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances, quiet strength, and finding peace on your own terms, subscribe to the channel and walk with us into the next beginning.